coming up next, who
Yeah.
is, I love listening to Andrew. Andrew's a beacon of light in this space, and I'm really glad that I'm still up for his talk
Yeah,
because
you're
he's
still up. It's
powerful
2:30
and
almost.
strong. It is. He's powerful and strong, and he doesn't say
Yeah.
much, but when he does, we all go, wow.
Yeah,
So take it away, Dawn.
absolutely. Andrew Folkler is a formerly alienated child who was separated from his mother for over 12 and a half years. The alienation began when his father remarried when he was only 5 years old. His stepmother would engage in alienating behaviors while his father was at work, ultimately leading to the severing of the bond with his mother. When he was 12 years old, he moved from the USA to Singapore, where his stepmother was from. When his stepmother and father's marriage began to fall apart, Andrew realized his stepmother was trying to use the same alienating tactics to turn him against his own father. Having no choice but to leave for his safety, Andrew left Singapore with his father and brother to return to the United States. Shortly after his return to America, Andrew reunited with his mother. Andrew has been reunited with his mother for over 10 years and continues to spend as much time as he can strengthening their relationship. He has also reconnected with his siblings who had never met him due to the alienation. Today, Andrew volunteers to support parents in the chaos of navigating their alienation journey. Many parents struggle to understand the psychological impact that alienation can have on their children, and Andrew strives to support them by providing clarity and action items that can help them get one step closer to reuniting with their kids. In his own time, Andrew continues to grow his career as a professional writer and lives a quiet life with his wife and child. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to toss the ball over to you.
Thank you so much, Don. I appreciate it, and thank you. So today, what I would like to talk about and title my presentation is how do you support alienated parents and children in their journey to reunification? And I know that as the frontliners like Dr. Elise, Dr. Childress are pushing forward for new and more improved modalities, that there are other things that we can do as either community members or just people who don't have the mental health expertise and licensing. Um, so like as far as what can we do? And I'd like to start with a story real quick. So there's a famous story about the writer Franz Kafka and a little girl who had lost her doll. And you see, Kafka, he was just kind of walking through the park in Berlin one day, and he comes across this young girl, and she's crying because she lost her doll. Kafka says, "Oh, okay, well, I'll help you look for the doll," but unfortunately, they couldn't find the doll. And so he tells her, "Okay, let's come back again tomorrow, and we'll look again for your doll." The next day comes, and again, after a long search, they found nothing. However, this time, Kafka hands her a letter, and it says, "This is a letter from the doll." And the letter says, "Please don't cry. I went away on a trip. I promised to write you every week about my adventures." And so every week, Kafka would meet with her, and he would write a new letter as the doll and read it to her in the park. And then one day, Kafka buys her a new doll and he hands it to her and says, and the little girl's a little puzzled. And she's like, this doesn't look like my doll at all." And Kafka pulls out his final letter and he says, and he reads it to her and he says, "My travels have changed me, and I don't look like the doll you remember, but deep inside, I'm still the same." So when it comes to alienation, whether it's between a parent and a child, the grandparents, siblings, extended family, one thing is absolutely certain. That is, the trauma and pain of alienation is going to be incredibly crippling. And it's going to put the targeted parent in a survival state, which can inhibit their ability to take the right actions needed to reconnect with that respective child. So, whether you are a police officer, lawyer, school teacher, judge, counselor, therapist, or even just someone in the community, you're going to come into contact with a victim of alienation, and you're going to repeatedly find yourself in the same position as Kafka. And unfortunately for everyone, the solution is not going to be as simple as writing stories as about the adventures of a doll, right? So, and before I go further, I want to acknowledge that within each profession, there are legal parameters that are to be followed. And it's not my place to challenge that. I don't have that respective expertise. But what I want to advocate for goes beyond the scope of our professional and individualistic lives, and that is our role as a human being. Because if we strip away every label that we use to describe ourselves, every label that we have for our personal identity, we're left with one label that unites all of us, and that is the Homo sapien. We are all just humans. Okay. And as humans, we have the unique capacity to heal and lift someone up. And we have a word for it in cultures all around the world. In English, we call it altruism. The Hindus and Buddhists have a Sanskrit word for it called Maitri. In South Africa, it's called Ubuntu, and it's agape for the Greeks. And again, it's not a call for overstepping any legal or professional jurisdiction, but as someone on the outside, you're going to meet someone within your community, within your circle, and you're going to see these various hurts and pain that they are experiencing due to alienation. Some at a mild level, where it's just a little bit of bad mouthing, but the kid still has contact, and some at the most extreme level, like Dawn's story, which you just heard. You're going to be standing in the same position that Kafka did. And if we take his actions as a metaphor, then the first step in helping an alienated parent in their journey to reunite with their child is to validate their pain and reinstill the hope that they will one day reunite. Because without that hope, without that inner resolve, what happens is that parent shrivels up. They lose faith in themselves. They spiral into depression. Some parents, in extreme cases, some parents will give up on their kids and they'll spend the rest of their lives making peace with it. And other parents, and I say this very seriously, other parents will just give up on life entirely. I've been coaching alienated parents for about 10 years now, and I've seen a lot of strong-willed people lose hope. And thing is, if we take a quick inventory of all the challenges that an alienated parent has, they're going to be separated from their kids for an indefinite period of time. Any time they spend with their kids, if they're fortunate enough to, usually ends in conflict, which just spoils the experience for everyone. So there's that unknown factor, it's like, I don't know when I'm going to see my kid next time. And then there's going to be that factor of, even if I do see my kid, are we going to even have a good time? So there's that. Second thing is there's going to be litigation costs, sometimes alimony and child support. Makes it incredibly to keep up with the cost of living. Friends and family start picking sides, and you find yourself losing more relationships than just the relationship you had with your spouse. And the stress of these situations will bleed into your professional and personal life. So it leads to more emotional outbursts, more rashly made decisions, and all of that stress just compounds to the point where it feels like everything else is falling apart. And on top of all of that, there's that sense of a lost identity. More often than not, I hear a lot of alienated parents tell me that, how can I call myself a mother? How can I call myself a father if I'm not even there for my kid? And so their sense of purpose, their sense of reason for being is being attacked in that respect. So here's the million-dollar question for this speech, which is, how do you give someone in this situation hope, right? Because we don't want to come across as trivializing someone's pain. We don't want to we don't want to make it sound like we're putting on these rose-tinted glasses. How do you give a parent whose child has been abducted by another parent or taken to another country? How do you give that parent hope? How do you give a parent who has a child who's been given toxic levels of antihistamines to the point of fostering addiction? How do you give that parent hope? How do you give hope to a parent whose child has been taught to sacrifice their own identity as a survival mechanism and adopt the abusive traits of another parent? How do you give that parent hope? And I'm going to be real with you. It goes without saying, there's no good answer. But I'm going to share something that I found to be valuable to these parents and what I use to help them restore their sense of hope. And it's going to start with this concept known as, in personal development, known as the locus of control. You see, most parents are operating with the belief that there's nothing they can do because everything outside is preventing them from reuniting with their kids. And they often set these specific outcomes. They'll think like, okay, if I send this gift from Amazon, maybe my kid will talk to me. If I get this court order and the judge, slams the gavel and sends the kids to me, that's going to end the alienation, right? Or if I tell the kids about the divorce, I explain the whole situation to them, maybe they will understand and they'll stop getting mad at me. Now, this is known as an external locus of control. Basically, what that means is their sense of control of the situation is in the hands of everyone else but them. Instead of being in the driver's seat, they're powerless and tied up in the trunk. They are entirely reliant on outcomes that they have no power over. And what these parents need to do is shift their focus to an internal locus of control. How can they learn and grow within their own life so that they can start building a bridge back to their alienated children? Because I can tell you right now that most parents can't see how the absence of stability in their own life is inhibiting their ability to reunite with their children. Because I'll be frank with you, alienation doesn't go away once the child and parent reunite. And I would go so far as to say that the most critical step of healing of that parent-child bond starts when both parties agree to reunite. I reunited with my mother about, I'm going to say right about 11 years ago. And, as Dawn had mentioned in my introduction, that was about 12 and a half, almost 13 years worth of alienation. And I still find myself trying to figure out, how do I strengthen that bond with my mother? How do I improve that relationship? And this is coming from somebody who's a bit of a personal development nut, like I really geek out about that stuff. But for somebody who doesn't know those things, somebody who's not as self-aware, how do you repair that relationship? How do you heal that relationship? And in most cases, it's going to depend on the modalities that Dr. Elise is sharing. So kind of circling back, right? It's very difficult to heal that relationship with between an alienated parent and an alienated child. It's very difficult to heal that relationship if the alienated parent has first not if they haven't built a home for the child to return to. So as a modern human being, we have quite a few things to worry about, right? We need to worry about our health. We have our finances, our career, our relationships. We have our own emotions, spirituality and religion, our sense of place in the community. There's all these different factors. That's just what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a adult in the community. And when any of those aspects of your life are in flux, your capacity to reunite drops because you're just having this added stress that's preventing you from thinking in a more executive state. And that's why whenever I help parents, the first thing I talk to them about is operating from an internal locus of control and making sure that they focus on those different factors within their own life. Because as they are strengthening themselves, they become the anchor for the alienated child to recover. Because the alienated child doesn't have the years of experience that an older adult would have, right? Most parents are going to be somewhere between, 20 to 30 years older than their child. That's years and years of experience that you have available, that you can, in a sense, impart that wisdom to your child. And when alienated parents are deep in it, they're not going to be thinking about, like, what do I do today about my debt or my declining health, right? Instead, what alienated parents are doing is they're ruminating on how their kid is in a toxic environment with an abusive person. And they're thinking to themselves, I got to get my kid out ASAP. I got to get my kid out. I need, they think about how much pain and trauma they're X has put them through, or the alienating or the alienator, they'll think about how much trauma they've been put through. And then they think to themselves, okay, well, if they treated me that way, then there's no doubt that that alienator is going to be using those behaviors as part of their parenting strategy. And you know what? If there was a magic wand, we could make all these bad things go away and everyone lives happily ever after. I'd be passing one to everyone out today, here today. But there is no magic wand. And alienation doesn't end overnight. It's a very long process. And the only way to keep going when you're, especially in such a heavy emotional state, is to have some amount of hope. And you need hope to reunite, hope to believe that you can enjoy your life even with all these happy moments, hope to rise above the absence of kindness and love, and the hope to be the kind of person that you're proud to be, someone that you can feel comfortable with. You can look yourself in the mirror and realize that you are a valuable person and someone who has meaningful impact within your community and within your inner circle, like the lives of the people that matter most to you. There's an analogy I like to share with people. I want you to imagine the alienated parent and the alienated child both have a broken arm. Okay. Now, the challenge is the alienated parent keeps thinking to themselves, I'm not going to go to the hospital until I get my kid to the hospital first. But we don't, but the alienated child is in a different household. It's out in a place outside their control. And so what you get is this situation where the alienated parent has this broken arm and it's not healing at all. It's just there, it's broken, it's staying broken. They can't use that arm. They can't do anything with it. Anyone who's close to them might go in to hug that person and, ow, why would you hug me like that? That hurts so much. And what ends up happening is that alienated parent is unable to receive actual love and comfort because they're still hurting from the pain that they have experienced. They're not taking care of their own injuries and they're putting off their own self-care because they think that they need to take care of their child first. It's a very noble thing for them to want to do, but it's impractical and it doesn't solve the situation. And I use that analogy more because if you use the analogy of airplanes and the oxygen mask, I guarantee you most alienated parents will get upset. But you know, if you come from that angle, usually that works a little bit better. So as community members, as professionals, you have the ability to instill hope in people, whether you're directing them to organizations and professionals that can offer support, you're learning about alienation through conferences like these, or even if you're just being present with that person as they are working through the pain that they're experiencing, you know, just be present as a fellow human being and letting them know that their journey does not end here. There was something that Dr. Elise had mentioned that brought back some ideas, like kind of like a last minute addition to this speech. I'd like to share it with you. There's several stages to how humans process trauma, and it was documented by the writer Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning. And when now, before I get a little bit deeper into that, I want to just very quickly put this disclaimer. I don't want to say that the experiences of the prisoners in Auschwitz are the same as alienation. They're both very traumatic situations, and they're both very different. What I will say is that the way we respond to trauma is the same. And as I was reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, it dawned on me just how similar the journey of going through alienation was to what he was describing in his book. And the first stage starts with shock. You know, this is usually occurring during the initial separation or the initial severance of the parent-child bond. The child is very shocked. They're not really sure how to process. Oftentimes they are shutting down, not really knowing how to navigate these conflicts. in terms of neuroscience, their brain is usually not fully developed just due to the fact that they're not old enough. And so navigating these situations are a little bit challenging and they're just shocked. The second stage is apathy. Apathy is how you tolerate the consistent trauma and abuse. One of the things that Viktor Frankl pointed out in his book was that quite a few of the prisoners would just tolerate it. They would see gross abuses of another person, and to them it was just another Tuesday because they had seen so much that they had emotionally numbed themselves just to conserve and survive. Because getting emotional, getting frustrated would be a risk to themselves. And for the alienated child, it's very much the same. Getting involved, trying to reconnect with you, puts themselves at risk, at risk of domestic violence, at risk of more psychological and verbal manipulations. And as a result, they emotionally numb themselves. They will get either aggressive with you or avoidant with you, depending on the child's personality. Afterwards, the third stage that he mentions was the after getting free, after breaking out from Auschwitz at the end of World War II. He noticed just how angry all of the survivors were, and how much frustration and intense anger that they were having, and how they didn't care about how their actions would affect other people because they felt like the world had done them wrong, and so why should it matter if they do someone else wrong? And it's rightly so, considering that you feel this intense frustration and anger, and you have to process all of that trauma. But once you process all that trauma, that's when you're able to search for meaning, and that's when you're able to liberate yourself so that you're no longer bound by the chains of that pain. And ultimately, that's the journey. That's the complete journey, I would say. I mean, the journey doesn't, like I said earlier, the journey doesn't end just by reuniting the child and the parent. The journey ends when both parties are not only reunited and not only reconnected, but they're able to move forward in a way that is productive and healthy, and they're able to extract their own meaning from their experiences and be the best possible person that they can be. So we have the capacity to instill hope. We have the capacity to guide them along, no matter where they are in their journey. And even though there's no guaranteed time frame that their child will reunite with them, and as I mentioned from Kafka's story, the child will likely be a very different person than the alienated parent remembers. And that's just unfortunate because the child is being subjected to high levels of stress and trauma. It'll change them permanently. I don't know who I would be were it not for the experiences I've had. But I do know that my journey didn't end there, and it's going to be the same for those parents. And you can instill hope in them. You can give them just a little bit of a push, just so that you can keep that inner fire going, so that they can one day reunite with their kids. That concludes my speech. Thank you, and you can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Andrew. That was so spot on. So many really important key things that people need to take away from this, especially parents who are looking at understanding their role and what we've talked about, the stoic kind of parenting. We've talked about that quite a bit, even somewhat with Ginger on this, how parents can, I don't want to say react, but how to put themselves in a better place, themselves in a better place, because it starts within. And I think one of the most important things is looking inside to solve the alienation problem or feeling alienated. And that sounds difficult, and A lot of times it's not well received, but we know from the healing that we've done, that's exactly where you got to start. You have to look in that mirror and you really have to take a good, hard look at yourself. And so some of the things that you were suggesting, I think, comes from having that understanding of your role and how others are, this is an interaction, right? We're constantly in an interaction. So thank you for your powerful message. It's great to have, you can see that a lot of us, there's a lot of women on this panel, but we do have a few of the guys on here, which is really important because even though the women speak out, men don't speak out as frequently. And sometimes they do, but they may not have or be an advocate or out there sharing their journey to help push change. So we really, really, really appreciate it that we do have the guys that are coming on and sharing their story, because it needs to be heard. Other men, everybody needs to see and hear this, and each one of us have a message specifically for somebody, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to listen to everybody, but that one, it could be Andrew that helps another father or another adult alienated male realize his story. So it's super important that you're here. Thank you so much for being here and for tolerating that brutal introduction. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to go fast to keep on time, but yeah. But you
Andrew,
did a wonderful job.
sorry.
Go ahead, Brandy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say you said something that was so empowering for me, even because last year, after I lost my children through alienation, I lost myself. As a young girl, I grew up with the hats of a career woman, a wife, a mother, so many different hats. And when I lost the hat of mother, I lost me. And I was no good for my kids. So it took me months and a lot of therapy and help from, Don and other organizations that I found a community where I started rebuilding myself. So like you said, when my children come back, and they will come back one day, they have a healthy mom and home to come back to. So when you said that, we never discussed that, but it was so crazy you said it, because that was me last year. I didn't know who I was, and I couldn't be any help to my children. So that part is so valuable that so many of us targeted parents really need to hear and embrace, because we don't know what to do after it happens. So thank you. Love you.
Yeah, it's so true. And I just want to briefly add to that. Of we alienated adult children, there's probably not one of us that doesn't wish our targeted parent had taken better care of themselves, had gotten more help, had become as healthy as they could be.
In Canada here, as you had touched on child support, they tell you right away, it doesn't matter. You have to pay your money. They don't care if you end up living in a cardboard box. So it's very hard. That's actually what happened to us, right? My oldest stepdaughter at 16 asked if she could come. She asked us when we had them if she could come and live with us and go to school. And she actually asked me, and I said, well, of course you can. Like, our home is always your home. And it ended up that the mother and the children ended up moving closer to us, and then we got thrown out of our home. So there is no protection for targeted parents here to continue to be bullied, regardless of whether you're paying child support, regardless of whether you see your kids, they just keep perpetuating it. So my husband is one of the ones right now who is the one who is going, I've accepted that my kids are not going to be in my life, and I need to figure that out. And that's kind of hard for me to deal with, because Well, I was also abducted and, my dad gave up on me, but I understand why he did that. Because he had to learn how to take care of him and he survived cancer twice. So all these parents, just make sure that you can at least take care of yourself until your kids come back. If they do, you need to be your best version. And I appreciate again, Andrew, thank you for touching on Viktor Frankl. That's a wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, for anybody that wants to read that. Really moving, very powerful.
I think another thing that's important is for my father, and when he realized that I was missing, it was weeks and weeks later before he even realized where I was, not knowing if I was dead or alive. The problem that he had was that he didn't know he actually had rights. He was actually established as my primary caretaker in social services. So he was already established as the only parent in the home and that the other parent was absent. He actually had more rights than he believed he had. He thought because he was the father, he didn't have rights. And back then it was more common that the children stay with the mother. And that's where he was with this. So he didn't realize he needed to, that he could have had something or done something about it. Yeah, Elise?
I also want to say that the amount of targeted parents who I speak to who are feeling suicidal is huge. And even just working with the Dads in Distress group here with Australia, the amount of men who speak about feeling suicidal because they're not seeing their children is extremely concerning. And I often will say to them, please, please, please do not do anything to hurt yourself, because when the adult child comes looking for you, if you are not there and you have died by suicide, that's a whole other massive drama that they then have to contend with and wonder if they had anything to do with it or could they have changed it. And then coming in, suicide within this intergenerational trauma is also very contagious. So the children will, some of them say to me, oh, okay, so my dad or my mom's killed themselves, so kind of they've left me here. They haven't cared enough to stay here to look for me or help me. What's the point in me being here? And now we've got suicidal children and adolescents and adults on our hands. Right. So this thinking is really critical. So we've got to get them to look after themselves. And this is where the adult children come in. It's important we have a voice in this space and say to them, don't, no, because we might come back. Mm-hmm. Well, we're likely to come back.
I think that's a good place it's a good segue here to move on to our next guest. So Ginger, I see, do you have a comment first before I share the screen? And I just thought you look like you might have wanted to say something. So I just wanted to give you a second.
Well, I loved Andrew's presentation. I was going to just talk about in my presentation, but I can do it now. The poetry and literary resources and imagery that Andrew brings to this is amazing. And the sense of this feeling of hopelessness and despair. And when parents are going through this, but also children, they feel very alone in all of this. And one of the biggest changes that's been happening the past few years is that people are beginning to come together and talk about this as parents, but also as children. And it is interesting. There's a big resistance to self-care amongst parents. Yeah. They say, I can't be happy. I can't be happy. Well, what if my kid sees me? What if my kid sees me being happy? That's a big one. Oh, I can't be happy because my kid will get mad. I'm like, where did that come from? Right?
We're telling ourselves in our head.
Yeah. So that would be my comment. So
thank you.
Andrew, actually, I do have a question for Andrew, and I think a question that all of us adult survivors would like to have. Andrew, I know that a lot of parents reach out to you, and I know it can be overwhelming. And a few years ago, you wrote a beautiful, almost manifesto about how you want to be treated by parents. What should parents keep in mind if they are contacting an adult survivor on Facebook Messenger, for example, saying, I need help, I need help, I need help? What are some rules that adult parents should have in mind? Because you brought up some things that they did that were almost re-traumatizing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that often parents will get into this intense emotional state, they haven't quite regulated themselves. They haven't quite processed the experiences that they're having, and it's very much still real and raw for them. And that's understandable, and I'm not condemning that. I think the challenge that comes is when they reach out to someone like myself or any other alienated child, or even like a coach like Ginger. They're they're looking for a silver bullet. They're coming in and they're like, okay, here is my 40-page life story, and please read through it and tell me what I need to do to get my kid back. Sometimes you'll see variations of that, like, can you email my kid for me? Some people will
Just to jump in there, like some random kid will listen to some other random person.
yeah, exactly.
Like we're gonna call up some kid and they're gonna be like, who are you? And you're gonna be like, I'm Andrew Faulkner. And they're gonna be like, oh, well then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if I was like Taylor Swift or something a little bit more relevant, maybe I could have a bit more
Taylor Swift.
influence.
Oh
But
my gosh.
no.
We do have another question for you, Andrew. Real quick,
Yeah.
Ginger, if you don't mind, can we ask
go
him one
ahead.
more
Yeah.
question?
Sure.
It's from Scott and the attendees. So he's saying, from your experience, if gifts and communication from the alienated parent are rejected by the alienated child, should the parent stop sending the messages and gifts to avoid extra trauma they feel when they arrive, or should they continue to reach out so the child knows that parent is still out there?
Okay, so I'm gonna try and squeeze this in as quick as possible so I don't eat up some of Ginger's time.
Okay.
There are a few things that you can do to approach gifts and messages. First and foremost, you always start small. I like to use the analogy of dating. When you're dating, when I met my wife, I didn't walk up to her and I didn't say, "Hi, my name is Andrew. Let's get married." It'd be a little bit too much too soon. And more often than not, parents are coming in trying to say, "Son, daughter, hey, let's reconnect." And the thing with that is, like, that doesn't mean anything. What does reconnect mean? Does reconnect mean 5 hours a week? Does that mean 10 hours a week? Does that mean we're going to live together for the rest of our lives? It doesn't really mean anything. But if you approach it from the angle of dating, it's like, hey, you might send like a small message just to get like a quick short conversation, like a micro conversation. Hey, there's this movie that came out. I was thinking about watching it. What do you think? Have you seen it? Is it any good? You know, if if an alienated child doesn't respond to that, your world doesn't end. It just means that maybe it wasn't a good conversation for them. But you can try and look for other small, insignificant topics that don't relate to the family, don't relate to the divorce, don't relate to intense emotional situations. What I like to try and encourage parents to do is do what reunited parents already do. Reunited parents don't sit around the table talking about the trauma. They talk about what happened in their day. One of the things that Ginger said that was just so important, that belief of I can't be happy unless my kids are happy. Can you imagine just how much more you would have to talk about with your kids if you were happy? If you were happy, if you had a bright, warm, positive home that you are a part of and you have curated within your life, with all the things that matter to you, and then you're just sharing that because you have so much to give now. And then your child's going to be looking at that and say, "Wow, where I live, it's terrible. I want to live in a, I want a happy home. I want to live and feel good." And maybe they might get upset at you first. They might accuse you and be like, "Oh, you've got rose tinted glasses or whatever." But I mean, okay. People tell me that all the time. But then I tell them that at some point in my life, I decided, you know what? From now on, I only want to surround my life with things that are artistic, musical, and beautiful. Now, how I define that is entirely up to me. I think that, public speaking can be a beautiful thing. I think that spending time with my family can be a beautiful thing. I think that going to work so I can provide for my family is a beautiful thing. But those are the parameters of my life. If it's not beautiful, musical, or artistic, why would I want to surround myself with things that I don't like? Why would you want to surround yourself with things you don't like? So it's a two-parter. One, you slowly work your way up. Depending on what stage your relationship is, you just start. If you are strangers, then you talk to them as strangers, and you try and do small talk, and you work your way up into more intimate conversation. As for gifts, if you feel like it's going to get rejected, thrown in the trash, save them. Buy the gifts, save it, put it in the room. And then when the time comes, if they do come back to you, you'll be like, oh, by the way, up in the attic, I got a whole box full of your stuff. These are I couldn't give you these gifts right back then, but I saved them for you because I didn't want them to get thrown away.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question.
Beautifully. Beautifully. Thank you, Andrew.